The doctor examined my swollen, shaking hand before quietly asking, "Are you certain this was just an accident?" I wanted to tell him the truth, that only 2 days before the biggest piano competition of my life, my own brother had slammed the heavy wooden door across my fingers. But when I looked toward my father, he only shrugged and laughed. "Nobody cares about your dream," he said. My mother didn't defend me either. She simply let out a sigh and told me I was wasting everyone's time chasing music. In that instant, I realized the very people who were supposed to protect me were secretly hoping I'd give up. What none of them could have imagined was that just a few hours later, a single knock on our front door would change everything. The stranger waiting outside hadn't arrived by coincidence. And before this story reached its end, the cruelest day my family ever gave me would become the greatest victory of my life. My name is Emily Carter, and I'm 27 years old. Looking at me today, most people assume confidence has always come naturally to me. They see me sitting behind a grand piano and imagine I was born with talent, encouragement, and endless support. They couldn't be more mistaken. For as long as I can remember, music was the only place where I truly felt safe. While other children rushed outside after school to play, I hurried home to the old upright piano my grandmother had left behind. Every key seemed to understand me better than the people who lived beneath the same roof. My father believed playing the piano was nothing more than a childish hobby. Whenever he heard me practicing, he'd shout from another room, "Turn that noise down. It isn't going to pay your bills." My mother almost never challenged him. Instead, she'd quietly remind me that I should focus on finding a real career instead of chasing impossible dreams. Then there was my older brother Jason. Jason never passed up a chance to remind me how foolish he thought I looked. If I spent hours practicing difficult pieces, he'd clap sarcastically afterward or imitate my performances just to make our parents laugh. They never stopped him. Sometimes, they laughed right along with him. Even so, I refused to quit. After years of private lessons, local recitals, and countless hours practicing until my fingertips were sore, I finally received the email I'd been dreaming about since my teenage years. I had been selected to perform in the Chicago Young Artist Piano Competition, one of the most respected competitions anywhere in the region. I printed the invitation immediately, smiling so hard that my cheeks actually hurt. For the first time, I truly believed my family would finally be proud of me. Instead, when I handed them the letter that evening, the room fell completely silent. I had no idea that moment was only the beginning of the worst week of my entire life. The competition was just 2 days away. Every minute mattered, so I followed the same routine I'd been practicing for months. Breakfast at 7, finna stretches, 4 hours of rehearsal, a short break, then another practice session that lasted until dinner. I wasn't trying to become perfect. I simply wanted to walk onto that stage knowing I had given absolutely everything I had that afternoon. I finished playing the final movement of my competition piece and gently closed the piano lid with a smile. For the first time in weeks, I genuinely felt ready. Then Jason walked into the living room. "Still pretending you're going to be famous?" he asked, wearing that smug grin I knew all too well. Ignoring him, I quietly gathered my sheet music. "What?" he laughed. "Too important to talk now. I'm not doing this today, Jason." He stepped directly in front of me, blocking the hallway. "Dad," he shouted. "Princess Mozart thinks she's better than everyone again." Without even muting the television, my father glanced over. "Reality will straighten her out soon enough," he muttered. I tried to move around Jason. Move. He didn't. Instead, just as I reached toward the doorframe, he shoved the heavy hallway door with all his strength. Crack. The edge of the solid wooden door slammed directly across my right hand. Pain exploded through every finger. He screamed so loudly that even my own voice didn't sound familiar. Dropping to my knees, I clutched my hand while tears instantly blurred my vision. Jason froze for barely a second before shrugging. "It wasn't accident." My father looked over, chuckled, and slowly shook his head. "Nobody cares about your dream, Emily. Stop acting like the world revolves around your little piano competition." My mother walked in from the kitchen, looked at my rapidly swelling hand, and simply sighed. "You two are always fighting." Those words hurt even more than the injury itself. About an hour later, I was sitting in urgent care while the doctor carefully examined my fingers. After taking several x-rays, he looked at me with a serious expression. "I'm relieved nothing is broken," he said, "but you've suffered severe bruising along with ligament damage. You really shouldn't be playing piano this weekend." At that moment, it felt as though my dream had been taken away before I'd even been given the chance to fight for it. My right hand rested in my lap, wrapped in thick white bandages that made it feel like it belonged to someone else. Every small bump in the road sent another sharp wave of pain through my fingers. I stared silently out the window, wondering how years of dedication and practice could be so destroyed by one cruel moment. No one said a word. My father drove with one hand on the steering wheel as though nothing important had happened. My mother sat beside him, scrolling through her phone without speaking. Jason leaned back in the rear seat with his headphones on, completely unaffected by everything that had happened. When we finally pulled into the driveway, I walked straight to my bedroom. The competition invitation was still pinned above my desk. I stood there staring at it for a long time before finally taking it down and placing it inside a drawer. I couldn't stand looking at it anymore. Around 7 o'clock that evening, the doorbell rang. I had no intention of going downstairs until I heard my mother call from the hallway. "Emily, someone's here to see you." Confused, I slowly walked toward the front door. Standing there was an elegant woman in her 60s wearing a navy blue coat and carrying a leather music portfolio. She greeted me with a warm smile. "Emily Carter?" "Yes, my name is Professor Eleanor Brooks." The moment I heard her name, I froze. Professor Brooks wasn't simply another piano instructor. She had trained concert pianists who performed on stages around the world. I'd watched countless interviews with her online and studied recordings of her masterclasses for years. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said kindly. "Your former teacher, Mrs. Henderson, has been sending me recordings of your performances for almost a year." I stared at her without saying a word. "As it happens," she continued, "I'm one of the judges for the Chicago Young Artists competition this weekend. I wanted to personally meet the young woman whose music simply refused to leave my mind." Before I could answer, her eyes fell to the thick bandage wrapped around my hand. Her smile immediately faded. "What happened to your hand?" I instinctively glanced toward my family. Jason looked away. My father folded his arms across his chest. "It's nothing," I whispered. Professor Brooks studied my face quietly for several long seconds before softly replying, "No, it's not nothing." For the first time that entire day, someone believed something was wrong before I'd even spoken the truth. Professor Brooks asked if we could speak somewhere privately. My father rolled his eyes and waved dismissively. "Fine, maybe you can finally convince her to stop wasting her life." She ignored his comment completely. Instead, she followed me onto the back porch, where the cool evening air helped calm my racing thoughts. Looking directly at me, she spoke gently. "I'd like you to tell me the truth." For a few moments, no words came, then everything poured out. I told her how Jason had slammed the heavy door on my hand. I told her about my father's laughter, about my mother's silence, about the doctor's warning that I shouldn't compete. By the time I finished speaking, tears were streaming down my face. Professor Brooks never interrupted me once when I was finally done. She looked me directly in the eyes. "Emily, your injury is real, but so is your determination." She paused. "The question isn't whether your hand is hurting. The real question is whether you're willing to fight smarter instead of fighting harder." The following morning, she personally drove me to a hand specialist she trusted. After another careful examination, the doctor gave me a small amount of hope. "You shouldn't perform the program exactly as you originally planned," he explained. But with proper support, therapy, and a few adjustments, there's a good chance you'll be able to perform without causing permanent damage. Those words became the lifeline I desperately needed. For the next 2 days, my entire routine changed. Instead of spending endless hours rehearsing, I devoted my time to hand therapy, gentle stretching exercises, and carefully controlled practice sessions under Professor Brooks' guidance. She helped me simplify several difficult passages without sacrificing the emotion hidden inside the music. Audiences rarely remember perfection, she reminded me. They remember honesty. Back at home, however, nothing had changed. Every time Jason saw the wrist brace supporting my hand, he laughed. Planning to embarrass yourself on a national stage? He mocked. My father only shook his head. You'll quit before you're halfway through. Even my mother quietly suggested that withdrawing from the competition would save me from public humiliation. Every cruel remark slowly chipped away at my confidence. More than once, I found myself sitting alone at the piano, wondering if they were right. Maybe I should give up. Maybe this dream had always been impossible. But whenever those thoughts started taking over, Professor Brooks would quietly place the sheet music in front of me and say, "Don't play to prove them wrong." She'd wait a moment before adding, "Play because this is who you are." By the morning of the competition, my hand still hurt. The pain hadn't disappeared. Neither had my fear. But my dream was still alive too. When Professor Brooks and I arrived, the concert hall was already buzzing with excitement. Young pianists quietly warmed up backstage while proud parents filled the audience. I watched mothers straighten jackets and fathers adjust ties before hugging their children and whispering encouraging words. I couldn't help noticing how different their experience was from mine. Professor Brooks gently squeezed my shoulder. "You don't need an entire crowd standing behind you," she said softly. "You only need enough courage to take one step forward." Then my name echoed through the speakers. The applause sounded distant as I slowly walked toward the stage. High beneath the sleeve of my black dress was the wrist brace supporting my injured hand. It still throbbed with pain. I kept reminding myself to breathe. The grand piano waited beneath a single spotlight. For one terrifying moment I froze. Then memories came rushing back. Every lonely hour I'd spent practicing, every insult, every laugh, every single person who had told me my dream didn't matter. I sat down at the piano. The first note rang through the concert hall.